Good morning. Welcome to Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Press, and I'll be your host for the next hour. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. I'm anxious to continue where we left off in the book, The Footprints of the Jesuits by R.W. Thompson, trying to understand what role the Jesuits have played in the world and what role they play today. We're talking about the period of time during the suppression of the Jesuits and their reinstitution by Pope Pius VII, and a historian, Dorignac, a Jesuit historian, talking about their suppression and their supposed protection and continuance of operations in Russia. Now, beginning at the top or near the top of page 254 in the book, the author says, referring to the existence of the Jesuits in White Russia after the decree of abolition and in violation of it, he, the historian Dorignac, the Jesuit historian, ventures to say, quote, the position of the Jesuits in White Russia was an anomaly. Okay? It was an anomaly, he says. And Pope Clement XIV had authorized the Jesuits to remain in status quo, unquote. Now, this is clearly false information. Clement XIV was very strict and very precise in his language. The Jesuits were abolished everywhere and forever. He made no provision for the Jesuits to continue operations anywhere in the world. Now, R.W. Thompson continues, he says, he, that is Dorignac, the Jesuit historian, fails to give any authority for this, for the obvious reason that there is none. Nothing can be found to verify it. It is undoubtedly of Jesuit manufacture, being contradicted by everything done and said by Pope Clement XIV. The language of his decree is conclusive upon the point that his object was to destroy the society, to destroy the Jesuit order, and put an end to it forever, not allowing it to exist anywhere. He makes neither exception nor reservation. Any other pretense is a palpable perversion of his meaning. Dorignac manifestly realized this difficulty and made an additional effort to escape it by attempting to impair the official force and effect of the decree of abolition. He says elsewhere, quote, in view of the future, that he, that is Pope Clement XIV, would not suppress the society by a bull, which would be binding upon his successors. He had suppressed it by a brief, which could be revoked without any difficulty whatever whenever public feeling might allow it, unquote. So here, he as is typical of a Jesuit, reduces this bull to a brief. In other words, reducing it from the voice of God on earth to the equivalent of a municipal ordinance that can be swept aside whenever it becomes convenient. This is Jesuitical in its root and its attempt to justify the Jesuits continuing their operations in White Russia. And don't forget, no mention is made whatsoever here about the Jesuits' operation in the colonies during this time. Okay? The Jesuits have always seen America as a mission field, and they've quite successfully exploited this mission field called America and turned this nation into a crusader for the Pope. Now, the Jesuits have an exchequer of words The Jesuits have a, quote, exchequer of words, in other words, a dispensary of words, a bank of words from which they draw at pleasure, employing those words to express or to conceal the truth as shall be necessary to advance their interests or improve their fortunes. In other words, they are very, very crafty with words. Kind of reminds you of a few biblical quotes, doesn't it? And it says, here, there is an attempt to interpret the meaning of the decree, not by the plain language that it contains, but by the name given to the instrument itself. Okay? Dorniak doesn't attempt to deal with the specific and very, very perfect language of the decree of abolition by Pope Clement XIV. That's too difficult to challenge. So he just simply calls it a brief. It was not important. But listen to what R.W. Thompson says. In what does the difference between a bull and a brief consist? If there is any, it must arrive out of the subject matter involved and not otherwise. One can conceive that a pope may regulate some inferior affairs, touching matters not essential to the universal church, by an order or a decree called a brief, in which case he or his successors may revoke it. But where such an order or a decree concerns the universal church, it must be considered a bull, because in that case, according to the Jesuit theory, it partakes of infallibility and cannot be revoked, for the reason that whatsoever is infallible must stand for good or bad. The decree of Pope Clement XIV is found in the Roman Bullarium. In other words, the Roman Library of the Bulls. Now, why do you suppose Pope Clement XIV's decree is found in the Library of the Bulls? Because it's a bull, not a brief, okay? It's not in a file cabinet in a dusty old dungeon underneath the Vatican. No, it's found in the Library of the Bulls. This is a library compiled to hold in perpetuity the infallible and the divine utterances of the popes. Okay? It's in the Library of the Bulls because it's a bull. That's what I'm trying to tell you. That's what R.W. Thompson's trying to tell you. The decree of Pope Clement XIV is found in the Roman Bullarium, preserved in the Vatican at Rome. There could have been no other purpose in placing it there than to attach to it the same dignity and effect as the bulls of other popes among which it is recorded. When thus deposited, it was undoubtedly considered irrevocable, because it related to a religious order which could exist only by the authority of the Pope representing the whole Church. When the Pope acts with reference to a religious order, he decides whether or not it is capable of fulfilling its professions. He then acts with reference to faith, and his act is therefore ex cathedra. In other words, from the throne of Peter. In other words, the voice of God speaking in the Roman Catholic Church. And it says, upon this ground, according to Jesuit teaching, he is infallible in whatsoever opinion he expresses, because it is within the domain of both faith and morals. Hence, in the discussion of the question, when does the Church speak infallibly, a recent Roman Catholic author of acceptable authority says that as the Church can never be, quote, an unreliable guide, it follows that she cannot err when she seals a religious order with her formal approbation, unquote. Of course, no argument is necessary to prove that if the Pope is infallible in establishing a religious order, he is equally so in abolishing and annulling an existing one, upon the ground expressed by Clement XIV that the good of the universal church and the cause of Christianity demanded it, and also upon the additional ground that the subject matter is the same. This proposition cannot be escaped by substituting assertion for argument. Now let me make another point. Pope Clement XIV was no fool, at least in terms of intellect. In terms of spirituality, according to Christ in the gospel, he was Antichrist. Okay, I make no bones about that. But Pope Clement XIV, who suppressed the Jesuit order, knew that the Jesuit order was brought into existence by Pope Paul III by a papal bull. And would it not stand to reason that if Pope Clement XIV was going to abolish the Jesuit order, that he would do it with the same instrument, a papal bull? And that's what it was, a bull. But the Jesuits have tried to soften the blow by merely calling it a brief. So that by calling it a brief, they can say it has no effect, that it can be swept aside very easily by this current Pope, Pope Pius VII. And isn't it ironic that Pope Pius VII, who reversed the papal bull of Pope Clement XIV, did it by a bull? Okay? We're talking about the establishment or the abolition of one of the holy orders, one of the so-called holy orders of the Roman Catholic Church. It matters in both faith and morals. And the situation simply dictates that it be done by a bull and not a brief. Now, this same Jesuit author, Dorignac, is inconsistent, seeming to forget that he had called the decree of Pope Clement XIV a mere brief, which any of his successors could annul. When he comes forward to speak of that issued by Pope Pius VII, he calls it a bull, and frequently refers to it as such, having previously laid his foundation by insisting that Pope Pius VII regarded the preservation of the Jesuits by the Emperor of Russia as, quote, the interposition of divine providence in behalf of the society, unquote. That is, that Pope Clement XIV had incurred the divine displeasure, the wrath of God, when he abolished the society. He never loses sight of the idea that the decree of Pope Pius VII bears the stamp of infallibility and can neither be annulled or modified. This is a subtle method of statement, but it is without the force of argument. It is simply Jesuitical. Jesuitical. And what do we know about the term Jesuitical? It's just the various ingenious ways that the Jesuits find to justify a lie. That's what Jesuitism means. That's what it has come to mean throughout hundreds of years of experience and history. Jesuitism is equated by those who are knowledgeable about the Jesuit order as liars. Now, these matters derive their present importance from the fact that they show how the Jesuits have become familiar with crooked paths. They show also the wonderful adroitness with which they have pursued these paths for many years, and how they have surmounted difficulties which have overthrown any other body of men. As they have never been known at any time of their history to abate any of their demands or pretensions, they are today, as they have always been, a standing menace against every form of popular self-government and whatsoever else is the fruit of the Protestant Reformation. Their rules of conduct are still derived from the teachings of Ignatius Loyola, their founder, who accepted by them as occupying the place of God, they regard as higher authority than any human law or any government where the sovereign power is guaranteed to the people. So the Jesuits put themselves above every human law and every human government, especially those forms of government that allow the people any say in the government. The object of the Jesuit order is to destroy Protestantism. So any attack that the Jesuits make against popular forms of government, such as we have here in the United States, is an attack on Protestantism. And any time you see your government becoming more and more dictatorial and less responsive to the needs and the demands of its people, you know it's a counter-reformation effort by the Jesuits. And all you have to do is go to Washington, D.C. and the surrounding areas and count the Jesuit universities that pump out people who are perverted with Jesuitical, monarchical teaching and mindset, and look where they go once they graduate. They're gobbled up by our government, and they're put in the most powerful places of authority. That's why the people of this country are losing their say in government. The Jesuits, who are protected under the religious liberty clause of our Constitution, are using that liberty to enslave us all. Now again, I had one listener wrote me and told me, "Tom, you just love your books. But reading many books is laborious, and all you have to do is believe in Jesus." I believe in Jesus, but I also believe in watching unto prayer. Watching unto prayer. Do you know that there's no way in the world to perceive the fulfillment of Bible prophecy unless you see that fulfillment in history? That's what we're doing here on Inquisition Update. We're not reading these books just to be intellectuals. We're reading these books to try to comprehend how the Antichrist has controlled our government, how the woman is perched upon the scarlet-colored beast of Revelation chapter 17. It is by reading these books that we make sense out of Scripture, out of the book of Revelation in particular, a book that is avoided like the plague in the churches these days. And when it is discussed, that woman, which is perched upon the scarlet-colored beast, is never identified. Why, it's beyond our understanding. Revelation chapter 17 just can't be understood, even though it describes the Roman Catholic Church in vivid color. It cannot be mistaken by anyone who is open to both the Scripture and history. Now, I believe my listeners are fairly well acquainted with the Scriptures or they wouldn't be here. But most of my listeners, most of those within the sound of my voice, are completely bereft of any knowledge of history that shows us the fulfillment of the prophecies in the book of Revelation. This book brings the prophecies of Revelation into three-dimensional reality in your mind. And it's important for us to read these books. Look, if you take that passage in Ecclesiastes chapter 12 and stretch it far enough, you might even use that as an excuse not to read the Bible. After all, it's 66 books, isn't it? It's 66 books. And we'll use that short passage in Ecclesiastes chapter 12 to justify not reading the Bible, let alone the books that reveal the fulfillment of Bible history and prophecy. But then after we've justifiably relieved ourselves of any obligation to read the Bible or history, then we'll pick up People magazine or the newspaper or some filth on the internet. There's all kinds of ways to Jesuitically justify rebellion against Almighty God. We don't do that here on Inquisition Update. Now, chapter 15 of this book, this most remarkable, historical, and prophetic book, entitled The Footprints of the Jesuits by R.W. Thompson, this chapter 15 is entitled Re-Entering Spain. That's right, the Jesuits re-entered Spain. They never, once they're kicked out of a country, it becomes a challenge to them to retake it, by force if necessary. Now, R.W. Thompson says the decree abolishing the Jesuits was accepted by all the Roman Catholic sovereigns and the people of Europe as final. It was an exercise of the highest authority of the Church. This bull by Pope Clement XIV. But it was not accepted by the Jesuits, who in contempt of this authority, the authority of the popes, brooded over the purpose to plot stealthily against it until they could obtain its revocation from some sympathizing and pliable pope. And guess what? They found one. Pope Pius VII. Only 41 years after their suppression. Look, I don't believe, reiterating what I said the other day, I don't believe it was ever a serious thing for the Roman Catholic Church, an attempt to abolish the Jesuits. They know that they are the experienced rowers of the bark of Peter. The bark of Peter stands stagnant in the water unless the Jesuits are rowing the oars. It was an expedient at the time. It was necessary at the time. The Jesuits had gone too far. They had made too many enemies among the monarchs of Europe and among the Roman Catholic people of Europe. They had gone too far. And the people were ready to walk out of the Roman Catholic Church unless the Pope did something. Okay? Pope Clement XIV suppressed the Jesuits. He ended up paying for it with his life. That proved that the Jesuits have control of the papacy. And Pope Pius VII literally, for fear of his own life, had to do what he had to do. Okay? But never has the papacy ever regarded the Jesuits as unnecessary for the motivation, the mobility of the bark of Peter, the little ship of state called the temporal power of the Pope. That depends upon the Jesuits. And when you see the Jesuits in action in all these nations throughout history, and especially in the United States today, you can look at them and know that they are the ones who are rowing the papal boat to world supremacy, the eventual seat of which will be Jerusalem. Now, continuing, R.W. Thompson says, their position was that of condemned criminals. All right? The suppression of the Jesuits by a papal bull made them condemned criminals in this Europe of monarchs and Roman Catholics who despised the Jesuits. It says their position was that of condemned criminals, compelled to recognize the authority and jurisdiction of their triers, while secretly endeavoring to find or to create some antagonistic authority from which they could obtain a grant of pardon or a revival of their power to repeat their offenses without pardon. They never stop. They will never cease their attempt to control the governments of the world and the papacy and to govern this world by what they call the divine right. Now, we've come up on the break. I heard the cue this time, by the way, and we'll return to the book, The Footprints of the Jesuits by R.W. Thompson, when we come back from the break. You're listening to Inquisition Update on FirstAmendmentRadio.com. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
100 days, 100 subscribers at $7 will bring FirstAmendmentRadio.com to the minimum level necessary to sustain it through 2015. Go to support.FirstAmendmentRadio.com. $7 a month. Really, you can afford that for our Protestant First Amendment rights and the gospel of the kingdom message. Where your heart is, there will your treasure be also. Go to support.FirstAmendmentRadio.com.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Have you seen the Left Behind movies? Have you read the Left Behind fictional book series? Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. Because they see the world stage shaping to fulfill what they have been led to believe is sound biblical interpretation, a left behind rapture scenario. This false view of prophecy is reinforced in the mind, not only of its adherents, but also includes those who have been merely exposed to the specific media. Is it possible that false prophecy can be fulfilled? The rapture theories have always been in dispute. Pre-trib, mid-trib, and post-trib disputes have risen up in exclusively evangelical circles of recent history, so that when true believers don't suddenly disappear, this element will easily go by the wayside when all see a new Jewish temple begin to be built. Will this be part of the great delusion that will come upon the whole earth? It seems that this great prophetic delusion has already overcome practically the entire American evangelical and Christian world. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. To learn more, visit crosstheborder.org. That's CROSS, crosstheborder.org.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on Internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the Internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
Okay, welcome back from the break. You're listening to the second half hour of Inquisition Update on FirstAmendmentRadio.com. If you love Inquisition Update and the information you get here, if you are moved by the Spirit to continue this research on your own, study of the Bible in comparison to the history of the world and the history of the Jesuits and the Roman Catholic Church, Support Inquisition Update by supporting First Amendment Radio, who sponsors the program. We thank Brother Nicholas for seeing the value of Inquisition Update and the information we bring forward here. Now, before the break, we said that because of the suppression of the Jesuits by Pope Clement XIV, by a papal bull, the Jesuits were put in a position as condemned criminals, compelled to recognize the authority and jurisdiction of their triers. Who were their triers? Well, of course, the monarchs of Europe, the Roman Catholic monarchs of Europe, the Roman Catholic people, the Protestant people who knew anything about the Jesuits, and common sense, common right and decency were the triers of the Jesuits. Their position was that of condemned criminals compelled to recognize the authority and jurisdiction of their triers, while secretly endeavoring to find or to create some antagonistic authority from which they could obtain a grant of pardon, or a revival of their power to repeat their offenses without pardon. The Jesuits never give up. They'll create their own friend if they have to. And that's what they did. He continues, he says, it counted nothing with the Jesuits that Pope Clement XIV was a canonically elected pope. Their own interest outweighed anything that concerned either the Pope or the Church. I want you to understand that the Jesuit order considers itself above and beyond any human society, any human organization, any human government, including the Pope, who they profess to serve. Okay? They are rebels against the Church whenever their power and influence and operations in the world are threatened by the papacy or the Roman Catholic Church. They are antagonistic to the Roman Catholic Church as well as to Protestantism. As long as the Jesuits are rowing the boat, the bark of Peter, that boat's going to go wherever the Jesuits want it to go. And if the Pope, standing in the bow of the boat, decides we should turn left when the Jesuits want to turn right, they'll kill the Pope. They have done it many times. Pope Clement XIII, Pope Clement XIV, Pope John Paul I, Pope Paul VI, every pope that is elected, including this Jesuit pope, the current one, Francis I, he knows that if he defies the Jesuit general, he's toast. Smoke and ash. The Jesuits rule. If they rule the government of the Vatican, you darn well bet they rule over the governments of the world. They can command armies and militias from all over the world to rein in a rebellious king. And the single nation upon the earth who is called more into action by the Jesuits to rein in other governments is the United States of America. Because this is the only nation on the planet that has never lifted a finger or uttered a peep in opposition to the Jesuits, who openly control our government. He says the Jesuits were willing to obey the Church, provided that the Church favored their society, but not otherwise. Consequently, it may be said of them then, as at all other times, that they recognized no other form of Christianity than that which centered in Jesuitism, and no other authority than that of their general at Rome. Folks, it's not Christianity, not by any stretch of the imagination, not Jesuitism, not Catholicism, it's all Baal worship. This ecumenical movement to reunite all the Protestants back under the authority of the Pope, and then to assimilate all the other pagan religions of the world into a global religion, An idiot can conceive that this is not Christianity. And we simply must stop calling it Christianity and call it what it is. The woman riding the beast of Revelation chapter 17. The woman being the Roman Catholic Church headed up by the Pope, and the beast becoming the governments of the world in support of it and carrying it to its ultimate destination, global government. When the Jesuit order was reestablished, they came out from their hiding places and appeared again in all the centers of European influence. Their numbers were sufficient to show that instead of having considered their society abolished, as they were commanded to do by the bull of Pope Clement XIV, their organization had been secretly and defiantly preserved without any departure from the principles of their constitution, any abatement from their pretensions, or any perceptible diminution of their numbers. Each one reappeared in the old armor of the order, re-burnished for use again. The weapons which Ignatius Loyola had forged for deadly warfare against Protestantism were reissued to the sacred militia of the order, and its drilled and submissive battalions renewed their old and familiar battle cry, announcing their determination never to lay down their arms until all the fruits of the Protestant Reformation were extinguished. The possibility of achieving that result stimulated their ardor afresh, and they became more earnestly united than ever in the cause of the Bourbon monarchs, which they realized that Pope Pius VII had assured the Holy Alliance that all the powers of the papacy should be employed to that end, and that they were to be placed as the special champions of retrogression, undoing the advancement of the Protestant Reformation, retrogressing back into the New World Order, or the Old World Order, rather. It says, the Jesuits were special champions of the retrogression, in other words, the destruction of Protestantism, progress, liberty, popular forms of government. We're going to go back to the Old World Order. Okay? And they were placed in the forefront of the conflict. The papacy, Pope Pius VII, and all the monarchs, the Holy Alliance of the divine right kings of Europe who had been unseated by the Protestant Reformation, got together and put the Jesuits back upon the oars of the bark of Peter. The Jesuits are going to bring the monarchs back into power. That's what they're all about. Many of us have been studying the bloodlines of the presidents of the United States and the secret societies that they belong to. And when you follow their genealogies, you find royal blood in every one of them. And the Jesuits are the ones who bring these people to power in the United States. They are establishing the blue-blooded monarchical system underneath the papacy. Popular forms of government are going to be eliminated in the New World Order. National sovereignties are going to be destroyed. The papacy, with the rowers of the bark of Peter, the Jesuits, are going to restore the Tower of Babel and the rule of the global king Nimrod, the Pope, uniting all the nations and undoing what God did at the Tower of Babel. The papacy, with the help of the Jesuits, are going to restore the people as one, to make them rebel against Almighty God. The New World Order is simply the Old World Order restored. R.W. Thompson is making this perfectly clear. He says the times were such that they drew fresh inspiration from them. The jealousies and rivalries among the sovereigns had thrown all Europe into tumult. The French Revolution had been produced of consequences which created a flame of intense excitement reaching the outer circumferences of the continent. Society was thrown into an agitated and perturbed condition, and the foundations of the strongest governments were threatened. the appearance of Napoleon had alarmed the hierarchy, the hereditary sovereigns. He had succeeded in striking what they feared would be a fatal blow at the doctrine of the divine right and hereditary descent of royal powers. Hereditary descent of royal powers. In other words, Napoleon, though he were a Freemason and not a Christian at all, and most probably Catholic in his belief, was a threat to the divine right of kings. Okay? Now, other historians, particularly Eric John Phelps, has said that this 33rd degree Freemason Napoleon was secretly working for the Jesuits. And what he was doing with his wars was to punish all of the monarchs for upholding the bull of suppression of the Jesuits. Now, be that as it may, it continues, Napoleon had scattered governments and destroyed dynasties with reckless audacity in order to build up new governments and dynasties obedient to himself. The reigning monarchs were dismayed at the rapidity and the success of his movements, being unable to anticipate when or where his quick and decisive blows would strike. But when his star waned, they again applied their united energies to the revival of their claim of divine right and to a closer union of church and state. Okay? In other words, the Napoleonic Wars had a blowback effect. In other words, strengthening these monarchs that they were designed to overthrow. It had the effect of uniting the monarchs of Europe with the papacy to restore the divine right rule and to suppress Protestantism, to destroy Protestantism. He says they could not fail to see that monarchism was threatened with defeat unless some agencies could be discovered whereby the unwary populations who were striving after freedom could be brought back again into the net which the papacy and the secular monarchs had spent centuries in weaving. These terrified sovereigns were seemingly relieved from their embarrassing fears when Pius VII ventured to bring to their aid what he intended should be the whole power of the Church by restoring life to the dissolved society of Jesus, the Jesuit order. They must have rejoiced as drowning men do when seizing upon some object that saves them. The Jesuit spirit did not need to be revived, for it had never been suppressed, and therefore they reappeared fully panoplied in other words, completely prepared for the renewal of the battle against civil and religious liberty, the popular right of self-government, and all the beneficent influences of the Protestant Reformation. Sympathizing with Ferdinand IV of Naples, the most bigoted monarch in Europe, at whose instance they were restored, the Jesuits selected such points of operation as would enable them to strike their hardest blows at the freedom of speech. What did the Jesuits go after? The very first order of business of the Jesuits is to gain control of education and then to attack freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and religious belief. Let me read it again. The Jesuits selected such points of operation as would enable them to strike their hardest blows at the freedom of speech, of the free press, and of religious belief, well knowing that where these were allowed, they gave birth to the principles of popular self-government where it did not exist before, and strengthened and maintained it where it did exist. Freedom of speech, freedom of press, and freedom of religion is an outgrowth of the Protestant Reformation. The Protestant Reformation gave us these free institutions that we enjoy today, both Catholic and Protestant. And the Jesuits are going to shut us up. They're going to make the press produce whatever Jesuitical communications that they need to indoctrinate the people. They're going to take control of the universities and the schools and the seminaries, and they're going to educate our youth to accept this new monarchical system, this new global system. Are you beginning to understand the purpose of this idea that of sustainability? That we're running out of resources. There's just too many people. There's not enough food. There's not enough air. There's not enough water. There's just not enough energy. There's not enough of anything. Now that just simply plants in your mind, as much as you might believe that malarkey, it plants in your mind, subconscious mind, that the God of this world who created mankind and said, be fruitful and multiply, was so inept that he placed us on a planet that could not sustain us. What does that do to your faith in the Creator? That the God that you say that you worship, when you go to school and you believe all these Jesuitical lies, this earth was created for man. This earth is capable of healing itself, but the only thing against which this earth cannot heal itself is the pollution of false religion, immorality, and sin. That is what pollutes the earth. The products of man do not pollute the earth permanently. The earth is God's gift to man. You want to purify the earth? You want to talk about sustainability? Then we have to give up all forms of false religion, false idolatrous religions, pagan religions, and acknowledge the Creator and give Him the respect and obedience that He deserves, and call out these Jesuits, these Jesuit divine writers, and make them the scourge of the earth, because that's what they are. They are the ones who are polluting the earth. They had to get control of education, take away the freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and religious belief. If you want to survive in this world according to the Jesuits, you have to go by their plan. They've replaced God upon the earth. They've completely trashed God's law, and they've made their own law for every man, woman, and child to obey. By force, by the rod of iron, by coercion, convert or die. That's what our children are being taught in the schools. And even if you pull the children out of the schools and admitting to yourself that there's something wrong with the public school system and try to educate them yourself, you have to use their curriculum. You have to teach them this global nonsense. The truth is just too beautiful. They have to teach lies. Lies that they know will eventually serve their purpose in this world. We have to get back to the Bible. We have to demand that the government keep their hands off of our freedom of speech. I demand my restoration of my freedom of expression on amateur radio. I demand that the Federal Communications Commission, which is there to serve the people, uphold the First Amendment to the Constitution and allow me to read these books on amateur radio so long as there are people on amateur radio that want to participate in my discussions. I demand that the federal government, particularly the Federal Communications Commission, be subject to the Constitution of the United States and uphold freedom of speech. And I demand that the Amateur Radio Relay League, the ARRL, the awful Relay League, observe the Constitution of the United States, the First Amendment, and quit teaching people getting into ham radio that discussions of religion and politics are verboten. If they loathe the Constitution of the United States so much, then let them go to Italy. Let them go to Rome, the Vatican. And let Americans, true Bible-believing Christian Americans, run the Amateur Radio Relay League. Get the Freemasons and the Roman Catholics and the globalists and the ecumenical evangelibellies out of the Amateur Radio Relay League, or disband it altogether. Because what they've done to me on amateur radio, they're going to do here on First Amendment Radio as well. They're going to silence any voice of opposition against their Vatican Jesuit-led New World Order. And it's time for my listeners and the people in this country to stand up and sound off. We know that their attack is against the Protestant Reformation, against the liberty wherewith Christ has made us free, and to bind us once again to the global Pharaoh. Well, I've crossed the Red Sea. I've been baptized into Christ. I've been fed by the manna which fell down from heaven in the Bible. And I know where my liberty is derived. It is derived by the one who died for me. And I have a right to proclaim my liberty, to defend my liberty, and to read these books exposing that New World Order Pharaoh. And I have a right to expect my listeners to respect the information that we're giving here. It's for the help and the hope of my listeners. It's a mission of love and compassion for those who have been grossly deceived, those who are patriotic to a fault, who have given up their loyalty to Christ in substitute for a loyalty to sinful, wicked men who are led by a monarch in Rome who the Bible calls Antichrist. R.W. Thompson says, sympathizing with Ferdinand IV of Naples, the most bigoted monarch in Europe, at whose instance the Jesuits were restored, the Jesuits selected such points of operation as would enable them to strike their hardest blows at the freedom of speech, of the press, and of religious belief, well knowing that where these were allowed, they gave birth to the principle of popular self-government, where it did not exist, and strengthened and maintained it where it did. They were encouraged by all who supported the alliance between the papacy and the allied sovereigns upon the ground that the parties to that alliance were endeavoring to keep church and state united. That is, the Roman Catholic Church united. That is, the woman seated securely upon the beast as the only certain guarantee for preserving monarchism. You know there's only one rightful monarch in all the world, in all the universe? Christ the righteous. It's not the Pope, and it's not the government, even the government of the United States, especially not the government of the United States. He says they were consequently accepted as co-workers in the cause of absolute imperialism and the enemies of every form of government where the people possess the right of sovereignty. The flag under which they marched had upon it all the symbols of despotism and no room for a single star to indicate the light of modern progress and development, not one star representing the Protestant Reformation. That's the New World Order. It's simply the restoration of the Old World Order. And we must fight against it. If we love Christ and we love the liberty that wherewith He has made us free, we must fight the Pope, the Vatican, the Jesuit-led New World Order. Thanks for listening. I'll be back Monday.
Gold and silver is tremendously undervalued.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the left-behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.